All right. Looks like we are up and running and good to go. Let's get everything switched over and get started for today. All right. To kind of break down what we're going to be looking at today and check sound and whatnot, I'm just going to put on a real quick beat that I made earlier for background noise. Hey, what's up, Iconic? Welcome to the Jam stream. I hope your Sunday is going well. Alright, so the setup today is going to be similar to what we normally do, but because I'm going to be demoing some stuff a little bit later and experimenting around with a new type of BGM format, I have... I'll fix my volume. Synthesizer Kun has returned, and the synth is hooked up. And we will be making use of that a little bit later. I see Sour Lad's here. What's up, Sour Lad? How you doing? Real quick, how's the sound for everybody? Are we getting any feedback? I think for the beatbox stuff, I need to be a little bit careful with my EQ. I might need to go in and tweak my EQ settings. If I have my EQ turned up too much, then it creates kind of a static since it's boosting a bunch of the audio input. So I have it turned down a little bit more than usual, but I can up my mic sensitivity a little if people are having trouble hearing me. I think I can actually boost dynamics a bit, since that puts less of sort of a distortion on everything. Let's leave dynamics about there. I know if I turn my volume up really loud, I can hear some distortion, but I think it's just due to the volume being really loud. But when we do warm up, I'll be keeping an eye on the audio readout to make sure we're not peaking too much for some of the snares. Okay, so we're going to start off with some intro warm-up like we normally do. Oh, hey, new follow from Sabri Kawai. Hopefully I said your name right. Sabri Kawai 2009, thank you for the follow. Welcome to the Space Bees, and welcome to the Beatbox Jam stream. I hope you enjoy your stay. And so we're going to start with some warm-up, doing some kind of basic drill type stuff just to get all the blood flowing, and then we'll move into some technique and sound theory discussion for beatboxing stuff, like we usually do. I thought up some topics to kind of go through that might be helpful for people who are getting into beatboxing or looking to learn. And so we'll talk about that for a bit, maybe do a bit more kind of drills and pattern practice. I have kind of a block for kind of miscellaneous type stuff, and then for the remainder of the stream, we're going to test a new type of BGM brainstorming format. It's going to be kind of more like a freestyle, an open freestyle versus, we actively work on all the components in real time. So I'll explain a little bit more once we get there, but it's going to be a bit more of kind of a chill environment. So hopefully it'll be interesting. And it'll be a good kind of test for creating things on the fly. So let's go ahead and turn this off. And so we'll start off with some drills and use this as sort of a final sound check. And then we will get into technique, sound theory discussion, and go from there. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. Kind of moving on. I don't want to spend too much time on warm up because I was cleaning some stuff before the stream and was doing a little bit of warm up on the front end. So I was already a little bit ready to go by the time the stream started. But we're going to keep working through stuff, and that'll be a good opportunity to keep things moving. And so let me actually change the caption since we can move on to sound theory, kind of transition out of the warm up. Okay, techniques and sound theory. Iconic says very nice. Thanks, Iconic. You are too kind. And Starlight is redeemed a hydrate. Well, drinking leftover smoothie from lunch. Hydration good. So for the technique and sound theory part of discussion today, I was thinking the last couple days about what I wanted to cover on the jam stream today. Since I don't really lesson plan, because this isn't really supposed to be like a lesson type of environment. But there was an idea that popped into my head that I think is interesting, and I don't hear a lot of other beatboxers really mention this. It's probably something they think about and do unconsciously after they've been doing it for a while. But it comes to this idea of alternate sounds and building out the sound inventory that we've talked about before when going through the different tools in the Beatbox tool set for making different sounds. And so alternate sounds are just variations or maybe a non-standard type of version of different instruments that you use that you might not readily have at the forefront of your brain because they're not part of the common tool set. And so to explain a little bit, you have the basics of the Beatbox toolkit we always talk about, right? Like a drum set, kick, hats, and snare. And I think a lot of people, as they're learning, especially in the beginning, kind of gravitate towards the sounds and instruments that they're focusing on and getting good at and practicing. But if I'm any indication, because I know I'm guilty of this too, as you spend a lot more time practicing and you get kind of into the routine with sounds that are familiar, you kind of gravitate towards those sounds more frequently, and they become your go-tos whenever you're doing pattern construction or freestyling or whatnot. And so the point of the kind of topic to discuss today is looking at alternate sounds that might not be as readily at the forefront of your brain, because there are probably hundreds of different sounds, sound variations, and different minor technique changes that give you a lot of versatility and variety to what you do in beatboxing. But if your brain is kind of single tracked into the familiar ones, and let's say you're only using the same 2 or 3 snares every time you're working on routines or patterns, then you kind of get into a rut. And I think a good exercise is to step back every once in a while and say, okay, I am a really big fan of the BGM snare. I use it in a lot of things, but what are some other snares that I know that I can mix in and switch things up so that it's not the same? Hats are a little bit kind of smaller in their selection. There are open hats, like a closed hats, just more like a crash or a ride, like a or a. Those are a little bit less as far as variety, but the big one to me, I think, is snares. It's kind of similar with a smaller amount of variations on kicks. You have like a regular standard kick, like you can add more or less punch to give it more kind of a forceful pop to it. It's like or back it off a little bit and make it a little bit softer. It's like a. One alternate on kick drums that I don't really use that often, and I should probably practice it more, would be a throat kick, which is closed mouth and just using your throat to create kind of a muffled kick, and that would be something like a. And I think most people know how to do that because it's kind of like your stereotypical, quote unquote, techno beat. You know, like the throat kicks are a pretty integral part of beatbox technique, but depending on how you learn, you might not think to use that as a kick in place of your regular mouth kick. So mouth versus throat. So like a standard dance type beat that I might do might be something like really kind of simple, fast 4/4-ish. You could swap in a throat kick, and that's how you're getting a. And that's kind of something that you just make sure it's in the inventory, so you have that at your disposal and you don't immediately go to the technique you're most familiar with. And throat kicks are interesting. They require a bit of training to get more power, but for the most part, it's just kind of doing like an noise with your mouth closed, focusing it on the throat, and that's how you're getting the. And so for kicks, again, a little bit smaller amount of variations, but snares are the one that I think has the biggest amount of variety for the basic elements of constructing beats. To kind of recap for folks who might not have been part of our previous discussions on like basics and the basic instruments, for snares, kind of in order of lower complexity, you have PF snare, P plus F sound together. And then you have kind of the regular breathing, what I consider the more forceful, higher pitched PF snare, which is usually my go-to. But then you have a less breathing, mouth pressure, looser, lower pitched PF snare, which sounds like again, or a little more dull, a little bit softer, lower, but doesn't use any lungs. So the lower pitched, kind of loose PF snare is good for combining with sung notes in layering. So something like. And so that's kind of how you would use the variation. But again, even if you're not doing that and you're using it in part of a regular beat, instead of doing like a regular drum and bass type rhythm, which is kind of what I default to for a lot of that, your standard drum and bass sounds like. Using the more forceful breathing PF snare, switching that out for the lower, more dull one, you would get, and it's the same rhythm, same construction, but the snare is different, and so automatically it sounds like you're using a lower pitched instrument, just like you're stepping down on something like a synthesizer or anything digital. It's just an alternate version of the note. And so I figured it would be interesting to spend time talking about alternate sounds within the realm of snares, since again, for the basics, I think that's kind of the most wide category before you start getting into things like basses and less commonly used basses or whatnot. And so for part of the discussion, I want to focus on snares and just kind of call out some of the ones I'm guilty of not really using too much because I either don't practice them or they're not really the front of the line when it comes to slotting into songs or beats, like in my brain. And so hopefully this will be just a way to show people the variety of ways you can use all the different tools and not get kind of stuck into the similar type of sound and similar set of instruments. And so we looked at PF and kind of a real quick two types of having that sound come out and creating that sound. The more forceful breathing one and the one that doesn't really use any lungs, but pitches lower because it's a bit more loose, more dull. Another one that I think is pretty widely used by a lot of people, but not by me just because I don't practice it, would be the cough snare. And the cough snare is really neat. It's just not one I really practice because it just mechanically feels different from all the other ones. But the cough snare, to kind of recap what we've talked about in the past, sounds like mine isn't very good because I don't practice it a ton, but you're basically creating a coughing type of sound from your throat. It's not vocalized at all, so it's not like a it's just a and then you're breathing out at the end with kind of like an H to give it a bit of a resonant echo. So it's short burst, creating that kind of grunt from your throat, but keeping it sort of light and then breathing on the end. And that's how you get the and people who have really developed cough snares, they make it sound very sharp, but also kind of echoey. A good example would be Napalm, master of the lip rolls. His cough snare is nuts. But taking the idea of the cough snare, what I think is a more interesting variant of that, I think it's considered a variant, would be a vocalized cough snare, because it comes across more like a synth, but you can use it like a snare because it has that same type of hit, but it actually has a melody, if you want to call it that, like an actual note attached to it instead of just a non-melody snare. So the vocalized cough snare sounds like and if it's basically done the same way, but you're putting a little bit of voice behind it to get that high-pitched noise. It sounds kind of like a yelp, but as you develop the sound and get it to sort of resonate more, instead of just sounding like you want it to be short, and so it goes from that kind of high-pitched noise into more of a focused actual snare. And obviously I'm choosing kind of a higher register pitch because it's different from everything else I do. But if you slot it into a beat, it might sound something like and there's some folks out there that have really good sort of vocalized cough snares. East Coast beatboxer Hershey, her vocalized cough snare is crazy, and she puts like a reverb on it, and so it sounds like it's echoing, which I think she does just with kind of her mouth and tongue position to create kind of an echo, but she does it really well, so it sounds like there's a reverb filter on the actual snare when she does it. It's pretty crazy. But that one is interesting because, again, unlike most of the other snares, there is a vocalized and a melody element, so you can pitch it up or down depending on where you want. It doesn't just have to be at the level I did. If you wanted to drop it lower instead of the you could do and it comes down to control. And so that's when I kind of want to work on a little bit more and kind of work into different routines, because again, it's just a different type of snare. It has a different hit to it because it's not impactful. It's got more of like a melody hit to it. And so cough snare and its variants are interesting. I should practice them more because they're just different and have a different sort of sound, and the way they slot in is just kind of a good change from your standard ones. Another alternate that I don't really use much, even though it's pretty straightforward in how you do it, would be a PSH snare, or its kind of more developed cousin, the punch snare. So PSH, just like a PF, is taking a P plus an SH sound and smushing them together into one sound. So you're taking a P and a sh and putting them together to get psh, 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 psh. And it sounds like kind of like a punching sound effect, which is kind of why I equate it to like a punch snare, which I'll get to in a sec. But it's really sharp, really fast, and it's really kind of light and neutral in pitch. And I think the PSH snare is more old school, going way back to the 80s and the early stages of beatboxing, and it was first developing amongst the hip-hop community. The idea of your snares and the repertoire is pretty limited. I don't know any super old school beatboxers, but I'd be curious to know if they had, 2 or 3 that were really common, since, again, it was in its infancy back in the day. I think PF was around, and K snares might have come a little bit later. I've heard of the inward K attributed to legendary beatboxer Kenny Muhammad. But for the PSH, the psh, 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 I've heard it used more as filler as opposed to a primary snare, but you can use it either way. Hey, Edward's here. What's up, Edward? Welcome to the jam stream. Hope you're doing well. We are talking about alternate sound techniques that are maybe less commonly used in beatbox kits, specifically mine. And so we're talking about alternate snares. And so for an illustration of how I've heard the PSH snare, as a primary, it might be something like... I've also heard it used as kind of a filler sound in between, kind of like a technicality fill, where you might be using a different snare as a primary, and then you slot in the PSH later, and it might be something like... And then it's kind of like a in-between type of sound, but you're throwing it in there as an additional sound effect. It's very simple, and I think kind of as a way to mix in some more of the kind of old school flavor, using PSH, because it's so easy, should be something that I should focus on a little bit, just because it's another snare in the sound inventory, just not one I use very often. But one I think is a little more interesting is what I call a punch snare. I think that's the general term for it. It's very similar to the PSH, but it sounds kind of like a cartoon or a stereotypical punch sound effect, and it sounds like... And what makes it a little bit different is you have your tongue sort of in the way of your airway to distort how the sound comes out, because a PSH, your tongue is flat, and that's how you're getting a pss, 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 pss. But for a punch type sound effect, you're getting a little bit more of an O shape with your lips, and your tongue is up in the way of the airflow a bit more, so it goes from psh to and if you think about cartoons, video games, or whatnot, and you have those stock punch sound effects, that is punch snare, and that's another old school one from way back in the day that I think was pretty common way back. And so in like a beat, you might have something like... It has like a really kind of old school hip hop-ish type sound to it, but it's pretty straightforward and easy to use. If you've ever made a punch sound effect, just messing around or doing whatever, that functions as a beatbox snare too, and that's where that kind of comes from. But the variant that I think is the most interesting between PSH snare, punch, and this third one would be what I call a rolling punch snare. I honestly don't know if this has an official name because it's so rarely heard. I think it's probably another more old school variant, but I have not asked a modern beatboxer if it's even common. I just know how to do it. And it's pretty simple. It's combining the regular punch sound effect, the with a slight tongue roll inside while you're doing it instead of just having your tongue be neutrally in the path of the sound. And so by adding a slight roll on your tongue, it goes from to. And depending on how pronounced the rolling is, you might not even really hear it. But if you really kind of exaggerate it a little bit, you'll get a. And I know this is an actual type of snare because I first heard it on a synthesizer eons ago, not the one that I'm currently using. There was an old synthesizer I had way back in the day, and it had a whole bunch of different percussion sounds, and one of them was this really kind of like muddy, distorted, hard snare, and it sounded like something was rolling as the sound was coming out. So I just call it a rolling punch snare because it's a variation technique-wise on regular. And so it's a little tougher to control because your tongue is having to do the roll in between. But if we slot that into the beat we were talking about before, you might get something like. You could even elongate it out a little bit and have like an extended snare with the rolling as sort of like an echoing effect on it. So something like gets a little bit more money that way and becomes essentially tongue bass, but keeping it short and sweet, that's how you're getting like a rolling punch snare. And I haven't talked to any pro beatboxers in quite a while since I've mostly just been practicing on my own. But I need to pick brains next time I get the chance to talk to one because that's a technique I've not really seen used, but I'm sure it exists. I'm not the first person to come up with that type of sound. It just might be a lot more old school, and in like the modern new school, maybe it's just not as common. For other variations on snare technique, we've talked a bit about kind of filter and using your mouth to mute how certain snares sound. The best illustration I could think of would be something like the outward K snare, the normally done with your mouth open to get that really sharp hit to come out. But if you just close your mouth, then it muffles and it sounds like it's running through like a high pass filter or even a mid or low pass filter, any kind of filter, and you get the pretty useful if you're trying to do some effects on a routine or pattern, like the filtered pattern, or rather filtered routine that I have. I haven't done in a while, but it's the drum and bass one that starts with the drum and bass rhythm, but the filtered snare, and then it slowly opens with the mouth, and you get less distortion on the snare until it eventually sounds normal. And it sounds like you're taking a filter effect and just turning it on, and then as the beat's going, you're just slowly turning it off. Like to illustrate, the filtered routine goes. And so that slow build up, you hear the quote unquote filter effect coming off, and it's just opening in the mouth more to get that muting to go away. But I feel like there's probably more potential to use a muted snare just as part of patterns and routines. It's going to be a little bit challenging to use because you're having to close your mouth and basically create a specific type of mouth position just to make that sound muted. But you could do something like and that's not really something I do in regular patterns routines, but maybe I should just because it's a different type of snare. It's gonna hit different and sound a little bit more unique compared to the regular outwards K type sound that is usually slotted into stuff. And so again, keeping with the idea of taking sounds you're not really used to and getting used to just working them in so that you're cycling through kind of a wider repertoire of sounds, I think is really important in beatboxing. But it's difficult when you get familiar and kind of comfortable with certain instruments, certain sounds, and, you know, again, you don't want to get into like a rut. So the last part of the kind of discussion here I wanted to hit on would be basses. And basses are a little bit more difficult to tackle because the amount of mechanics and techniques that go into the various types of basses are definitely a lot more complex. It's not so much like a one-off instrument so much as a technique to get the sound to come out, if that makes sense. And so for me, if I were to use my habits as an example, for the vocalized basses, things that use your vocal cords and your throat, my go-to is usually kind of a flip-flop between throat bass and lower register vibration bass. So your higher register, middle to higher register melody sounds for a bass, something like usually throat bass is one of my go-tos because it's one of the ones I know the best and I feel can do the most consistently. And if things drop into the lower register like we've seen on a lot of patterns and routines, it switches from being the more tight throat bass with the to the more loose and resonant vibration bass, which sounds like. And thinking about it, for me, a lot of my default mouth position is a barely open lip filter. It's not a lip bass, it's just a filter on the sound so that it's coming out through a really narrow part of my lips and getting a bit of vibration and resonance just because it's coming through such a small kind of channel with the sound. And so for both throat bass and vibration, that's where you're getting them versus an open mouth, like unrestricted, unfiltered bass, which would be wow, 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 wow. I like the kind of more tight, controlled, filtered with the lips, the lip filter. To me, that just sounds the most clean. But again, talking about variations and familiar techniques, it would be good to mix up more of the open mouth and even like the wow, wow, wow type noise, which gives you that sort of sound oscillation, is a good way to change up how the sound comes across in whatever you're doing. It might be the same note. You might be doing, and by changing it to like a wow, 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 all of a sudden the sound hits different and it feels like it's not as monotonous. And so that's kind of something I've been trying to force myself to think about because, again, that's the one I like the most, but I don't want to just use that exclusively and kind of get pigeonholed. For the other types of basses, again, another kind of wild card in the whole mix of bass is inward, the one I've been practicing on quite a bit. And at this point, inward bass is still very much developing sound for me, as the one I learned last of the major ones. But the potential for inward bass as a lower register heavy type of bass, it makes it a little bit unique compared to the outwards vocalized basses. But like, to check in on the sound itself, inward bass for me sounds like and eventually I want it to be a lot stronger and have more of a resonance to it. But for just comparing note registers, the lowest I can get with outwards vocalized chest bass would be that's about as low as I can push it. If I do it inwards, I can already hear, again, we talked about this way back a ways, but it's coming in a couple steps almost under the lowest point in vocalized chest bass. And I know if I get better at inward, it can go even lower than that and even more forceful. That's the thing. Getting the technique down is the first major challenge in learning how to do that sound inward. But as you practice it, the amount of power and the amount you can really push it, that's what develops over time. And so it's one I've been drilling a lot. I'm hoping to be able to work that into routines and stuff once I have more control over the bass. But just like we talked about before, that would be another thing to start prioritizing in the repertoire of sounds, as far as, you know, do we want an outward bass versus an inward one if we're going for like a real heavy dubstep drop type sound. You know, if we want to pair it with inward drags as kind of a way to get sound and air inwards instead of outwards, that's another sort of tool. And that's another thing that I've been kind of practicing, not just doing the sound inwards in a vacuum, but combining it with things like inward drags or something that's going to give it more of a rhythm. So like if we're doing a combination of drags, you might get something like, and my voice is a little tired, so it's tough to do, but you're just breathing in and using your tongue to create rhythm in addition to just the sound. And that's what makes it really useful for things like drops. So more to come on that as I get better at it. But all of the developing bass type sounds come down to endurance once you learn how to make the sound. That's the toughest thing. Just being able to do the sound for longer and to be able to push it harder to get more of the sound to come out. Another variant of the different basses that I don't really use as much now, not really a variant, just another kind of species of bass, would be lip bass. The really tight, controlled lip bass as opposed to lip oscillations. Lip oscillations I use fairly frequently. It's one of the first sounds I ever learned how to do. And that's just a... Whether it's unvocalized with no singing behind it to create a pitch, or if it's vocalized for something like a... That's one I use fairly often. But lip bass, which is a lot more tight and controlled, sounds like... That one I haven't been using as much, and I've been trying to practice getting that into routines more because it's just a different type of distortion. And if you can control it and keep from sputtering and getting really like flappy and loose, you could do some really interesting layering or filtered effects for sounds that are coming out of your mouth vocalized. And so if we think about maybe something more similar to like a synthwave type of sound, using lip bass and messing around with the pitch, you might get something like... And it's just using the... which is the lip bass. Again, not the most controlled I'd like it, but you're combining that with kicks, snares, and a variation in pitch to create like a moving bass line. So instead of it being one note, using the vocalization behind it, that's how you're getting that pitch to move, you know, up or down or whichever direction you want, which is pretty handy, and it creates an interesting effect, especially if you're trying to duplicate something that sounds like synthwave or something electronic like that. And so rather than using lip bass kind of in a vacuum as, you know, distortion or on its own, I think pairing it with things to create more of a melody, a controlling melody type sound, is something I don't normally do. I should probably make that a priority as well, because I do like a lot of electronic type of style of beats. And so not just using the lip oscillations, which again, pretty common, use that fairly frequently. Getting in the habit of mixing in lip bass, I think, would give more variety and more options for creating the different sounds. And so let's see, for the last, I'm trying to think of any other major bass variants. I'm not really good at vocal bass. I've talked a little bit about that one. That one is another one I'd like to get better at, because I'd like to focus in this year of 2023 for emphasis on different techniques. I kind of want to focus on more melodic type of techniques. Synths, vocal bases and whatnot. So as I kind of get better with some of those, I'll bring them to the sound theory discussion, just so people can see. I'm not going to demo a technique I suck at because it's not really going to be that helpful. But as I sort of learn some of these other ones and get used to the different techniques, we'll talk about them on these jam streams, so people who are interested can know, all right, here's another type of sound or sound technique that's going to give you flexibility for creating whatever sounds or styles you want. And so I think we can go ahead and move on from sound theory. I want to spend a little bit of time just doing some drills and running through kind of beatbox freestyle stuff before we get into BGM, because I feel like we haven't done a lot of that. We've done a lot of talking through the last several streams, but we haven't done a lot of just grinding and running through drills to kind of apply what we've been practicing. So let me change this to drills. And we'll spend a little bit of time just experimenting around with maybe some of the alternate sounds, things we've learned and practiced up to this point, as a way to sort of segue into the BGM discussion. And again, for folks who might have jumped on after we started, I'm going to be trying something a little bit different with the BGM today. It's going to be a bit more freeform, but I think it'll be interesting. So we'll go ahead and get there when we get there. But for now, I'm going to run through some drills and kind of work on piecing together some ideas and sounds that we've covered so far and other things that we've talked about up till now. And like we always do here on the jam streams, feel free to drop any questions or stop me if anyone wants me to talk about certain things. It's definitely still open forum for all of that. That's why we do these. But in the meantime, we'll do some freestyle practice. Need to take a drink. Need to take a drink real quick. Good timing on the Stretcherdine too. Ugh. All right. It is weird. Maybe it's because I've been jumping between a bunch of different basses so far, but for some, or not basses, snares rather. But it seems like my BGM snare is a little bit less sharp than it normally is. And I've yet to figure out why that happens sometimes. Usually when I'm well warmed up, the is consistent, but every once in a while it just does not come out consistently as sharp. And I've yet to figure out why. I'm going to assume it's because my mouth is tired rather than not warmed up, because we've been making sounds and doing stuff this whole time. So I don't think it's a matter of not being warmed up. Because we're doing a lot of things like the oscillations, it could be that it's just, my lips get tired like any other muscle. But that is interesting, because normally my BGM's pretty sharp, and doing like the rapid spit snare, is not hard. But as I was doing the tail end of that drill and practicing, it was difficult to stick that sharpness and get it to really be clean and crisp, and I don't normally have that problem. So that's interesting. And so I think what we can do is move on to BGM. Again, I always welcome questions at any point, so most of you that are regulars already know you can ask me questions anytime. But I'm going to change the caption, and we're going to see how this plays out. And this is going to be new. For those who've been here on a lot of the jam streams, especially when you've been messing around with the synthesizer, you're kind of familiar with when we start constructing the BGM tracks for use in the future. We do it sort of component by component and bounce ideas off each other as far as style or mixing up instruments and doing stuff like that. Well, what I want to do today, and this is kind of a trial run to see how this sort of plays out and how you folks sort of react to it, I am going to just start putting together ideas in essence, freestyling and constructing the beats, and I'm not going to be stopping to talk about each step of the process like I've done before. So in reality, this is pretty similar to what I do when I'm not on stream and I'm not interfacing with the chat. You folks can definitely talk to me and ask me questions. I'm not ignoring the chat, but rather than stop and explain every step of the way, I just want to organically start putting things together beat-wise, and we'll see what sort of materializes, and hopefully it kind of evolves into like a fully fleshed out series of BGM tracks and is more of like just kind of a chill vibe instead of this is how we're doing each step of the process. And so the reason why I want to do it this way is because when my synthesizer's hooked up, if I want to be doing any inputs from it, I have to turn off all of my mic boosts, because otherwise, like we've talked about in the past, my recorded loops get that feedback from the dynamics and EQ on top of the synthesizer. It boosts it and gives it that staticky distortion. And we don't want that, because it'll make the quality of the overall track much lower and you'll be able to hear that hissing. It's very obvious in the older tracks I've done, including almost the entirety of the Halloween project, but now I know how to fix that, so there shouldn't be any issue with feedback on future things. But since I have to turn off the boosts, I figured I can focus on putting together ideas and messing around with stuff on the actual loops, and if I need to explain something or if I want to break up what we're doing, I can just turn the boost back on and we can talk. But when they're off, I'm just going to keep kind of going and experimenting around with ideas, and hopefully it'll be like an evolution of the track we're putting together that everyone can see. And the tricky thing is, if I'm doing beatbox sounds, I need the boost on so that the loop can pick them up at a decent volume, but I have to turn the boosts off in order to put stuff in from the synthesizer. So we're going to do kind of a hybrid type of style and put stuff together. But let's see how it works. So I'm just going to start messing around with ideas and experimenting around with things. I'll keep an eye on the chat too, and if anyone has questions or whatnot, I'll turn everything on so I can talk. But again, we're calling this freestyle practice, so let's just see what materializes, and hopefully it'll be good, chill time. So I'm gonna clear this off, and let's focus on some kind of more hip-hop-ish type stuff today. We haven't really done a lot of that recently, I think, so we'll give it a try. So let's get started. Also, before I turn the volume up, I'm going to make the overall track volume of everything louder so that most of what you're hearing is going to be the loop. When I need to talk and turn the mic boost back on, I'll drop everything down. And hopefully I remember to do that. So for folks jumping on who might wonder what I'm doing, that's why the track volume is going to be louder, because the point is to hear the evolution of what we put together. So let's see what happens. All right. Let's turn on the mics back again. And so that was an interesting experiment. It started off as a hip hop ish type beat and then became kind of more of a trip hop beat by the end of it. Not necessarily what I was intending, but kind of an interesting series of evolutions of the track. Again, messing around at different things with the synthesizer gives me so many more options for adding in instrument sounds and messing around with stuff like that. But just messing around with the simple progression of melody across the different instruments that I added in, pretty simple, nothing really complex as far as melody, but adding in different registers and making stuff higher, lower, kind of came together decently. It's a bit more of a kind of chill-ish, maybe a little bit darker vibe, which is, again, not what I was trying to do, but the point of doing these freestyle experiments, and maybe we'll do this every once in a while going forward too, is just to see what ideas materialize. We throw them at the wall and see what sticks, and then everything sort of evolves on the fly. But I do think, in order to give folks watching the opportunity to contribute, since that is also the point of doing this, this is definitely a functional BGM track I can use for later, but it needs a name. So for folks watching, I'm going to turn it on, and I shouldn't need to mess with the boost because I don't need to say anything. I'll turn it on, and if you have any suggestions for what to call this one based on the style, tone, etc., just drop them in chat and I'll write it down so that eventually when I go back to record all these, I can remember what to call it. I'm going to save my work because I didn't save once during that whole thing. Okay, so I will turn on each component and then let it run for maybe a minute or so, and then we'll see if we can come up with a good name for this one. And then we're going to do the whole process again with a completely new track from scratch. We'll start with a different bass rhythm. Maybe we'll do it based purely on the synthesizer to start, and then see what comes out of the exercise a second time. So, all right, let's run this one from the top. I don't think I'd want to have reverse there. I just wanted to see what it sounded like. Iconic suggests clean space. That's not bad. It does have kind of like a space, abstractish type sound to it, which again, started with a hip hop beat. Was not expecting it to evolve in this direction, but I definitely think that'd be appropriate. Edward says electric waves. That would also be pretty appropriate. I kind of want to merge Iconic and Edward's ideas together. I'm just trying to think of what would make the most sense. It doesn't have to be just two words in the title. The title could be whatever I want. I kind of like clean space waves. That is definitely a unique type of title that kind of speaks to what we're putting together here. Clean space waves. Let me go pull up my BGM list. What do we think about that? I think that'd be an interesting idea for the title. I'm going to put that down. Good suggestions, folks. Edward says, I've noticed how the BGMs always have short titles. They don't need to be. Usually they're one word or two words. But they don't have to be. Like last time, Crusher named one in Latin. The one that we did was called Ad Astra, which I think is to the stars in Latin. And I think Edward was the one who named Baile de Caballos, the horse dance. And so not necessarily restricted to one or two words. Whatever I think kind of fits and doesn't sound too clunky. Like, I wouldn't want to name a BGM track something like the abstract representation of the human condition. A little bit of a mouthful. Doesn't really roll off the tongue too well. But yeah, I like clean space waves. We're going with that. Let's save this. And save our work on the loop. Now, let's do a new one. I'm going to start from scratch again. And put this on a new loop. Clear everything off. Now, before I turn everything off and kind of go into freestyle brainstorming mode, I kind of like the idea of starting the rhythm, because again, I usually construct these rhythm baseline melodies just because it's the most natural way of constructing stuff in my brain. Doesn't mean it's the most correct, but let me turn on one of the percussion kits and you can mess around with that before I turn everything off, because I can't actually record with the boosts on, but we can play around with some of the instruments first. This is the rock kit preset of percussion instruments on the synth here. Oh, that is insanely loud. Okay. It's going to be loud because the boosts are also boosting the keyboard, which I'll turn off when I actually start to record things, but let's think about a good kind of try and develop a hip hop track this time. We'll see if we're successful, but maybe something like maybe a little bit faster. That might be a little too fast. And I think I want to layer a bunch of different snares together. I'm starting with the clap just as a placeholder. We'll put that in there, and then I think I want to layer a couple other things on top of it, but I kind of like the even stagger it on one of the rhythms. I think it's a little bit too fast. Yeah, I like the stagger there. Okay, so let's start capturing stuff, and then we will see what evolves from this one. Will it be similar to the other one? Will it be different tonally? Let's find out. are back. That one kind of went interesting places too. I feel like the tone and general vibe didn't dramatically change since we kind of started with a bit more of an up-tempo, hip-hop-ish type beat and kind of built on it. Didn't really switch tones. It didn't suddenly get a lot more brooding or dark. Got kind of jazzy though. I wanted to throw in a sax as I was laying down the piano part and then that distorted flute synth. I was like, kind of sounds like there should be some sax. Iconic says, I'm going to suggest we call this bass. I like it. We want bass or bass-based. A play on the, based blank. I'm fine with either. I kind of like the double pun on bass and like a bass structure almost. Let's go with bass. I think that I'll write that one down unless anyone else has something else that they think would be appropriate. Real quick, I'm gonna turn the track back on. I'll put a couple of the loops on since I like having the different melodies coming in now, and I don't think it'd sound great to play them all at once, but I need to go use the restroom. So I'm going to turn the track back on, and if there are any other ideas for titles, we can also put those in the chat. So let's see. All right, be back in a minute. Go ahead and save our work here. I really should be timing how much time I'm spending on each one of these. I think it's probably around like 15 or 20-ish minutes. I'm kind of noodling around, messing around with the different instruments, and then we kind of come back together. So in a way, this is actually a bit more productive as far as getting a cohesive loop track together, but it's also a little bit more one-sided. So I do think this is an interesting format. So let's see if we can do another one. Maybe we do a more dance-oriented one for the next track. So let's save it onto a new loop. Clear all that off. Maybe for this one, we actually go for a more dance, techno-ish type sound. So kind of a rapid rabbit kick, and we'll do beatbox sounds for this since I've got everything turned on. Oh, I see Iconic's got to take off. Iconic says, got to go, but thanks for the fun and chill time as always, my dude. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Same to you, Iconic. Thanks for tuning in and hanging out with us today. Always appreciate you just chilling and vibing with us. I will definitely see you in the next stream. I have to figure out the schedule for the week, but tomorrow, Mortuary Mondays on Wazzy's channel is going to be returning. So if you want to watch two idiots get spooked by demon bodies, we should be doing that. It's going to be a little bit later in the evening, I think, but yeah, that should be a fun time. But yeah, take it easy, Iconic. All right. So maybe we'll do one bar, and then we'll decide how we want to do the rhythm. But for like a dance type beat, maybe something like a, and then I'm gonna layer a throat kick under this to give it more of a punch, and then we'll see if we want to mix up some other instruments on top for the actual rhythm. But let's go ahead and give it a try, and we'll see what sort of develops from this one. No banjo. All right. Make sure my mic's stuff is back on. So that one was interesting. I feel like that particular track didn't really, again, diverge in tone and style. The point was to create like a dance EDM-ish type track, that kind of driving rhythm and whatnot. But what ended up kind of evolving on that one was actually the high-end instruments. I kind of thought, as I was playing around with the different instruments, I thought it'd be kind of cool to put a chorus type instrument on here. That's what this one is. Very simple few notes for a high-end melody. But it does sound like a bunch of digital voices, as it were, singing, which kind of complemented the rhythm and whatnot. But what you might have heard as I was messing around with this one, I had the kind of more bouncy bass line in the beginning, and then once I did the chorus part, I deleted out the bass line and redid it for this more slower string melody progression one that we have here. Kind of makes the whole thing sound a little bit more dramatic, which is kind of an interesting effect. And then with the beat, again, pretty basic, standard 4/4 type of techno-ish beat. I layered in a couple different... Let me turn this off. I layered in a couple different kicks, including a throat kick. I went back and added the electro bass kick from the synthesizer itself, and I used a standard snare drum hit. Added in a click from myself. That's what you hear kind of in the background. And then just a real simple, I think it's offbeat hat. I added that with the synth as well. So the rhythm is kind of a mix of beatbox sounds and regular synthesizer sounds, but it kind of blends together so you can't really hear it. Before we do anything, let me save this. We don't want to lose all of our work. And so pairing the rhythm in with the bass line, and then thinking about the progression of the other instruments, after the choir part comes in, we have this is one of the keyboard, maybe an electric keyboard or electric piano. Again, the melodies, because I'm not a composer, the melodies are all very simple, and they kind of play around with octaving and harmonize a little bit. I'm trying to get better at mixing up the note progressions and keys to not have like the same kind of major key progression on everything. But we had this part come in, and then we had the trumpet. I'm a big fan of trumpet type sounds in electronic music. I feel like depending on the mood and the tone for the song, either a trumpet will slot in pretty well, or like on the previous one with like a sax, either alto or tenor, or even maybe a soprano. Those all tend to slot in and give you kind of like a jazzy-ish sound. But because you don't really hear a lot of brass types melodies with regular kind of techno-ish EDM, that's why I decided to try and play around with the notes on the trumpet, and I think it fit pretty well when paired with the choir, interestingly enough. first and then the slicer, because I think if we go 75% on the beat scatter, it's gonna sound different. Oh, not really. Oh, there it goes. Okay, yeah, we're gonna go 50%, 50% on the scatter, and then we turn it up to 75%. We turn the slicer on right after, so it's gonna sound like this. Once we have the breakdown part run its course, we turn everything off and then we revert back to standard. And I just realized that the electric piano is pretty much the same progression as the choir and kind of backs it up as kind of like a support melody. Start them at the same time, it would sound like. I feel like we'd have to do it on the bass line as well. Funky. That really flips around the melody. It's more or less synced with the rhythm, so it's not off tempo. Sounds like the whole thing is kind of being pulled backwards and like sucked through a portal. It's an interesting effect, but I don't think I would do that for the actual song. Okay. That is definitely an interesting one. I kind of want to use that for the next BGM project. I wonder if it'd be considered cheating to use one that we created on stream. Normally those go into the BGM collection, but I kind of like the sound of that one. So maybe if I feel like cheating, I will stick that one in the upcoming BGM project for the spring, because I kind of like the vibe and it sort of fits the EDM electronic aesthetic that I'm going for with that release. We'll see. If I come up with some other stuff, I'll leave it in the BGM pack. But we need to figure out a name for this one. So let's turn on the core instruments. We'll leave the horns off. Main instrument that's kind of at the forefront of this one, just as far as grabbing your attention and kind of forcing you to look at it, is the choir. So maybe something that kind of focuses on the electronic aspect, and then the choir instrument, the choir kind of melody as the forefront. Breakdown, how everything changes. I kind of like the idea of like cyber choir, because it also kind of rhymes. those. Write that one out. That might work. Just as kind of an interesting through line on playlist. I'm putting this one on the BGM collection now. I may move it, but I'm gonna call this one Cyber Choir. Definitely kind of fits in line with the switch up here where you have the slicer cutting the beat apart. It sounds kind of like the feed is being interrupted and stuttering, which again kind of fits the line of this futuristic-ish type sound, but it doesn't affect the choir, which is actually kind of interesting. If we did turn it on, it would sound like this. It does become consistent to have the effect play through, but I kind of like the idea that the choir is uninterrupted by the breakdown, and you hear it shine through and doesn't get chopped up like everything else in the song. Bass. Didn't want to forget that one. Okay. I definitely think ending with the choir part towards the end, as it leads out, would probably be the best way to sort of emphasize what the track is about. I definitely don't think I would change that. But I think at the time, I do have to go run to the store before it gets too late. We could do another one, but that's probably going to take us closer to like another half hour or so to get through. But looking at the list, we did 3 of them. Normally, depending on how complex I choose to make these loops when we're doing them kind of in real time, usually it takes me like an hour sometimes to do one. We did 3 of them in an hour fairly quickly and efficiently. So I kind of like the idea of doing this freestyle exercise. One, because it gives me a chance to sort of just start spitting ideas like rapid fire out and see what they sound like. But I definitely think I want to include more interaction stuff with chat too. So next time we have a jam stream, I'll think about how I want to do it. Maybe we do kind of a split. Maybe we do the first section kind of freeform, spitballing ideas and see what happens. And then we sit down and do something a little bit more closer together and do it kind of section by section like we've done in the past. But overall, pretty productive. I'll do one final save here. I'm glad this was kind of a success. You guys can give me feedback. Oh, yeah, thanks, Sour Lad. What do you think of the freestyle format? It's a little bit less interactive, but if you're looking for, good background music, just as I'm noodling around with my instruments here and trying to create something, give me feedback either now or next time or on Discord or wherever. If you like that format, then I can kind of fine tune it for the future. Because I definitely enjoyed doing that. It was an interesting challenge to try and come up with stuff, rapidly instead of in section by section. But let's see if there's anyone online to raid. Not many people online. It's a little early on a Sunday. But I see Teresa Tessa Queen is live. She is playing Azur Lane. We can go ahead and raid her. So let me go ahead and this. We will go to outro. And we will go ahead and call that a jam stream for today. thanks to everyone who stopped by. Again, this was a bit of an experiment, but I think it was a success. So we will be back next week. I haven't figured out when yet, but like I said, I think Mortuary Mondays are picking up again tomorrow. So I'll probably see you folks over on Watsy Street. But in the meantime, hope everyone has a good rest of your weekend, and I'll catch you folks later.